Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 101. We are thrilled to say that, right? I'm messing around with the angles here for a little bit, but 101. Part of the beauty of getting to 100 is that now you get to keep it and move forward with subsequent numbers. I guess also it will be such a little... a small, as this thing develops, we'll have to figure out, like I've said, some of the aforementioned successful podcasts, vlogs, YouTube channels, they may keep track of the number, but they don't refer to it. So again, getting past 100 and not using the number as my launch point and thinking about what it's going to be for the next 100. And I guess I don't know why I won't just jump right in, because that's definitely one of the it's definitely one of the I've noticed it's definitely one of the tactics and or the way a lot of pods start are they jump right in. They skip the intro. The intro's text only, or it's recorded at a different thing. But when they have the person there, they don't want the person to listen to the intro to either for embarrassment or for not giving due deference or whatever. So it is a little bit time to retire the idea of referring to the number all the time. But I guess it was a way of keeping track and a way for me to feel good. And also to feel I don't want to say the weight. There is no weight here, but there is something to it. Now, I said last week that I guess I'm celebrating the small victory because I'm proud of like making it to the point of 100, which is still and all, just a drop in the bucket. You have to look at it like that, because 1,000 might even be the place where traction is, quote unquote, traction is reached, and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know what the future holds. I know that I wrote a book, and I guess I was gunning for 100,000 words. That may be different in pages, but 100,000 words, right? I got to that. And am I now going to write books only? I don't know. So 100 is just, for me, it's a way to say it's a way for me to like shake off, for my own edification, the dilettante label, and to celebrate again the new beginnings, small beginnings, forsake not, right? But I have in the past, and what I'm trying to learn is what it is that reflexively made me not celebrate in the past really certifiably celebratable things. And if you're really on the gratitude tip, and if you're really just trying to go with a more joy-filled life, small things, right? What are those ways to recalibrate your self-pitying ways? Is 10 signs you're doing great. You have hot water, you have hot food, right? It's I forget, there's a sandwich shop, Bristol Farms, or one of these Mendocino farms had some of their artwork in the thing, and I forget who they're quoting, but as long as your mouth is full, like, of food, your problems are at bay, and for most of us that is the case. Now, conversations, and what happens is, this is a conversation, isn't a monologue, but it's a conversation, and what happens week to week, I have a pressure that I don't want to fall trap to, although working on segments in the new century of this show, working on format, working on themes that aren't associated necessarily with the number. Okay, we'll get to that. But that is a pressure that some of us feel acutely when we are irked about, when we're not thrilled about. You've heard people who don't enjoy small talk, and my analogy is small talk is traffic lights, traffic signs that we agree to ride on the right side of the road, that we figure out whether there are if there's a right on red, all these things. And where you see people losing their cool is when people blow through that stuff. And so I think small talk and staying with the basics at first is sort of the traffic lights of human interaction. And so that would be the weather, which is, it's summer, it's hot. I know that's the lamest thing to start with, but like, it is a way to commiserate, because then you're off to the races about, we go to the mall, we go to a movie. Some people like the heat. You go to the beach, if you get your feet in cold water, you're taking cold showers, that becomes an actual conversation. That's getting off on the road. That's the green light, And then there's the yellow light. Some people screech to us. They think that's a stop. Other people gun it. And that's when you get a little salty with the conversation. That's where you're like, what Saturday night is for me and my wife, or, that the yellow light, that's definitely, where you separate the men from the boys, the girls from the women, that's where adults can sort of mention things. And then the red light for me would be, somebody running a red light, or somebody, I used to call them third rail topics. Now I'm saying, you're at a red light, and that's when someone opens with a salty take on a controversial topic, and you're like, you have to rebuff that. But some people want to rebuff even, the hey, how are you? And I don't know what that has to do with 101 and moving on, but I do have a pressure now to make these vivid. And if I start to riff on what I've been doing this week, it's been a week of consistently going to the gym. It's been a week of preparing for this short film that we're shooting on the next weekend. And it's been a lot of like tinkering with my website, going mad on the phone with the web hosting because things were going haywire, and I pressed publish and I had to redirect to an old site and a new site. So I've launched a new site, and then it's not optimizing on the iPhone. And so it's been a week of that stuff, but these are the quote unquote consistencies and the showing up things that, if you see somebody once in a while, when they say what's new, like that's a bad opener, right? I don't want to say bad, but you know what I'm saying. If every conversation is a set in more like the surfer thing, when they call it a set, you can go out on the water, and if you have a ritual of surfing on every day or every morning, sometimes there's no sets. It's a, what do they say? It's a plate of glass out there. There's no breaks. There's no waves, but you're still out there. But that doesn't mean you're not out there. That doesn't mean you're not loving the water. It doesn't mean, you take what you get. You ride the wave, that Zen thing. I think that's sort of still with the conversation. And when somebody says, what's new? Tell me what you've been up to. It's that to me is, that's a tough starter, and that's why a lot of people really don't like small talk, if you will, because, and what a big comic thing to do, not when you're showcasing, not when you're doing specials, but when you're working new rooms, you want to go earlier because you want to get the hell out of there, but also because you can't. If you're working at a tiki bar and they got this giant Easter Island tiki head on stage, you know the first 3 comics are going to make some jokes about that shit, and so by the time you get up there and take a shit on the room, you're not going to have anything new to say, and you're stating the obvious. But there are so many infinite ways to communicate with people, and so many infinite ways to do this and to speak and to make things interesting or not. And it's the self-judgment, it's the fear, it's the wish to perform, it's an expectation of liveliness that a lot of people can't live up to, the introvert extrovert thing. But a lot of social media is sort of I don't know, it's taking away a lot of our it's making us thin-skinned, I would say, right? Because I've been a bartender and I've seen the list of 10 things never to do to a bartender. Cool. Like, I get that that's content, and I get that, but you're never going to scold the customer. So when you write this article, it's like fantasy fulfillment. It's what you would have said if you could have said, And yes, all those people are fucking boring, who don't know what they want, who, there's a million listicles about what irks bartenders. And then there's the same for what not to say to an actor over the holidays. If I know, and it's like, sure, yeah, those are all shitty things. And you think they're in the service of educating, but it's you're trying to control people, and shitty people are going to be out there. And I guess the thick skin you have to develop, if you think that is a thing, is just kind of knowing the difference. And I guess the gratitude for the inner circle you have, or who you will interact when you do have a choice, that becomes the thing, And in comedy, the problem I have with the word hack now is like it's hacking. I think it started with hacking for computer hackers, and now everything is a hack to packing. You want to put your the shower cap they give you in the hotel, here's a hack: put your shoes in there so the dirty soles of your shoes don't get on your clothes. And it's a hack. But when I started out comedy long ago, being a hack was a bad thing. And what you find out is they're hack comedian, but there's hack human beings, and those are the people who, that's what she said, and they can exist in a comic. You can be a hack person, a decent comic, but not a hack comedian. And certainly in the creative field, it's have I seen you? Most people mean well. And here's the thing. Shea Wiggum is a great actor. I dig his work. He's been in everything. Off the tongue, I know who Shea Wiggum is. My girlfriend doesn't, I'm sure. She watches a lot of stuff with me, but when we're apart, she's watching different things, news, reality, things like that. And she doesn't pay attention as much as I do. Shea Wiggum is killing it. He's a very successful actor and great, and very rangy. And he plays urban and rural and highbrow and lowbrow. He's got a lot of range. Shea Wiggum, look him up. I would see him and I would be like, that's a working ass actor. And that's an example of someone that might not be a household name, but we all know he's very successful in the biz kind of thing. Now, I'm no Shea Wiggum, so when somebody says, have I seen you anything? And I say, yeah, well, I've done this, that, or the other. What they're really saying is, how should I treat you, right? But there are places, if Shea Wiggum was in visiting Dallas and was hanging around my girlfriend and her family, have I seen you in anything would be the question for a very successful actor. And I think that's a good note for everybody. Like, there are a very few people who are world famous, right? But what I'm saying is there are all these vlogs and things that I'm doing here, or listicles, or, where they're saying when you go home for the holidays, don't ask your actress, don't ask the actress at the table what they've been in. It's rude. Yeah, I guess so. But I guess let's just get back to manners. And it doesn't mean that bartenders need you need a code of behavior for the bar. We have to toughen up. And be quick enough to, there is a way, and the British do this so well. The Brits have a way of being polite but pissing you off, and or letting you know they're insulting you, but they do it still within manners. But there's a way to say, there's a way to be deft when someone comes out of pocket. But anything in the performing arts is going to be target rich for the hack, for the envious, for the clueless, and most people are just clueless and hopefully innocent. And trying to explain to my mom why I'm doing a short film on a weekend with friends, that's very much it's just a non-starter for being frustrated, because it's not that it's hard to grasp, it's what we do, and a lot of things don't add up to there's 365 days a year, and not even A-list movie stars are working 200 of them, right? And so there is a lot of downtime in life, except for people who have, more traditional paths. And to get offended is to be a little bit thin-skinned, or, and what people can't knock ever is your hustle, I think. And they just know that. And and then that's when you have, really lovely people in your bar job. How many people were not supportive, but like impressed by having finished a book? It was always the customers who didn't. One buddy of mine, I don't know anybody in my family or my friends who ever wrote a book. That's great, But then when you get into the creative, when you're backstage at a comedy show and you say something about your book, someone's like self-published, they want to knock you down a peg because they're competitive. And so it's just people are people, right? Like Depeche Mode said. People are people, and they're gonna do shitty things, or they're not. And I guess I have to work on my tolerances for discomfort, right? And I think that getting back to celebrating last week 100, but always in the past truly celebratable things, I was always tampered down. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I don't know why. I think maybe it was some form of, it wasn't safe to be shiny and bright. There would be some criticism. There would be some envy. I don't know. Or I didn't have faith in it ever happening again. Or I was being falsely humble, which was, being falsely humble that's a slippery slope, because, then you're insincere, and then you're kind of putting a bit of in a sense, a weird mojo on your achievements, because you're saying, you're getting cocky about the future certainty of things. And then there's always the idea that, oh shit, this could be my last gig, And so, but at the same time, if things are hard won in terms of 100,000 page book and getting it out there and having people review it and read it, like that, and inevitably, if you're making a living, right, that question is always the intrusive question that people blow through in small talk, right? What do you do for, like, if that's somebody's first question, I'm in trouble, because it's, that's when you say I'm an actor. Oh, what have I seen you in? That I live in that insecurity, and I can't change the world. So, and we used to think those were rude questions, and that's old school. I'm old school. I still put manners first, but you can't really avoid it. Eventually it comes down to that. But the question isn't, are you making a living? It's, have you been paid at all? Because if anybody knows anything outside of, you don't have to read a lot of news to know that it's tough out there. And, outside of a few people, there's always a necessity to supplement income. And so certainly as an actor, you have to do that. And it's, the idea is whether you've made money. And why is that anybody's business? And I had a scene I wrote in a short film I was trying to work with. The question, what do you do for a living? And the guy says, why, you want a loan? You need money? No, why? Why would you assume? Well, then why do you need to know? And it was like this sort of like, you got off on the wrong foot with this guy's scene because that rude question. And A lot of that is that. But again, then there's a content where it's like 10 things, that it's status and things like that. And that's why you keep your circle tight and close, because you have a shorthand, you have history. You don't have history with the rest of the world. And I think you have to guard against ego, meaning, there are very few people who are world famous where, with the Shea Wiggum example, but, can you imagine? I would be mortified if someone said, have I seen you in anything? It's like, you've seen him in a million things, but not everybody can, and I remember working in New York. We were in a kind of a hot spot, but a lot of soap opera actors from different soaps would come hang out because we had good live music. And one of these women who I didn't recognize because I don't watch the soaps, beautiful woman. So obviously she's going to catch attention, and you could assume she maybe was an actress or a model. Someone sat next to her and said, "Oh, you're an actress," and the same shit you hear. I've heard so many bad conversations as a bartender, and I've heard some good ones, and I've been in some bad ones and some good ones, and I've had rude people and not rude people. I've basically been almost like at the information center at the crossroads of the world. I've met the world, and the genuine article of a nice person is it's very simply, it crosses all borders, boundaries, nationalities, etc., etc. The person was sort of prying, and he said, "Oh, so you're working? Oh, okay. He goes, "Are you famous?" And she goes, "Yeah, I guess I am." And I was like, and I don't know that. I guess famous is not for you to say, but also famous is also not. It's not necessarily a merit thing. To be famous could be to be infamous, right? And that would be the judgy part of it. But for someone who I only recognize as attractive, but not from their work, to say they're famous, when for me it's, Muhammad Ali would be an example of someone who was intercontinentally famous. And so Shea Wiggum would pale in comparison to that. But certainly a lot of people, and if you live in LA and New York, there is a celebrity, a little bit more about that nonsense. But all I'm saying is that there are people who don't know who Kylian Mbappe is. There's people who just don't. And that doesn't mean he isn't who he is. It doesn't mean he isn't quote unquote world famous. It just means that, get to know like the human, or take some solace or some inner calm or inner pride in, kind of knowing thyself, knowing who's important, knowing what your public, everyone has a public persona. And the people who don't, who are as they are alone out on the streets, are often street people or people with afflictions that can't, at very least, have a public face. So to call people insincere for that, I think is, asking a lot. But I'm off on a wild rant. But what I mean is I guess I have thought about what I would talk about this week other than the gym and the website, and that I have a short film coming up and I got to learn lines, and we've gone through the saga of new headshots and all this stuff, and I'm tinkering with the angle. This is probably too far away and it'll look crazy online. And I think I've had 2 failed attempts to press record, but at least I caught it. And I'm doing this to get it in the can so I can safeguard against losing ground, et cetera, but I'm doing it empty stomach, which is a tricky thing, and I'm learning. And I wanted 101 to be a humdinger, and it still can be. I was definitely moved by, again, a person who may not have been world famous, but was world continentally famous, and Glenn Hansard last week. That whole thing. Anybody who's made has a public wake is, whatever, famous. But I was less moved by his ceremony than, for example, the Shane McGowan ceremony where he was there. And in my last week ramble about Glenn was that he was such a spirit, such a sage, such a musician that he really brought it home for Shane MacGowan. And while Shane MacGowan had his charms and turn of phrase and could sing on pitch, Glenn Hansard was, and this is subjective and my opinion, but 10 times the musician. The Pogues different, and Shane MacGowan, I remember being at the Fleadh Festival, which is spelled Fleadh or some Fleadh. It's a Gaelic word, I think, and it was like an Irish music festival. I was there to see a band called the Saw Doctors, and again, I've always had this odd affinity, maybe because of a tiny sliver of lineage with, Irish culture. A lot of New York is Irish. A lot of my friends are Irish. On the East Coast, you're going to meet a ton of Irish people. And at the point, the Saw Doctors had a song that was like in a Guinness commercial. And then I took it to the next level of tracking that down and buying the music. And they were big they had a terrible name. Not the Spin Doctors, the Saw Doctors, just in case you're wondering. And the Saw Doctors were playing they were headlining the Fleadh Festival, kind of based on this Guinness commercial. Never Mind the Strangers, I think was the song. And they were kind of a bar band. And so I went to the Fleadh Festival, and Tracy Chapman was one of the headliners. And I've never done a festival, but like Shane MacGowan was on the bill too, but he just couldn't perform because he, battled the bottle. So anyway, I'm going on about how, and maybe I got into a negative vortex of the internet, but there was a lot of negativity at the behavior of people at the funeral, and yet there was universal praise for the way Glenn handled the Shane MacGowan funeral, and I think he was just that good. And my whole point about him last week was how good he was, that he would always get the assignment to be center stage with the mic and leading the charge, and in his passing, they still couldn't find a star up to that level to honor him. And that is the individual person no longer there that, he was the headliner among headliners. And when he's gone, that is gone forever. Right. And so, that was the take away from that and how unique people are. And so there's a double-edged sword. We think famous people have it made. We think they have less problems, but they are as special and unique to their loved ones and paradoxically to complete strangers because of their talents that we feel we know them, and we feel that there is something to mourn when they lost. And then in their sort of galaxy of stars, there are certain contributions that move us. And then, oh, what a loss. And then vacuums in entertainment are created, whether that's an important thing or not. There are power vacuums when leaders pass on, when election, we know, but there are these vacuums. And the idea of market correction, right? That can still be the case. Bill Simmons on all of his podcasts, but mostly on the Rewatchables, talks about how certain actors were market corrected by, quote unquote, more desirable versions of the templates and the archetypes that actors present. And then I would say that there are also vacuums. So, for example, the loss of Tupac and Biggie Smalls, there was a vacuum. Did Jay-Z rise up? Would he have been able to compete? Would it have been a trilogy? Nas, like whoever, somebody had to quote unquote step up, and certainly that is a market correction. That is the marketplace. But in the point I was making about Glenn Hansard was he didn't have the market share, but he had the undeniable clout of the genuine article, And so that would be the hope for me. That would be the hope for, and a guy like Shea Whigham, he's got to be always considered one of the hottest actors on the set because he's great. So, but he's not the lead often, And those are all enviable things to be. But I guess in the absence of having a busy week or whatever, I was struck by a random decision to watch an Anthony Bourdain documentary on HBO. And I was in New York simultaneous to him being in New York, and I was in the restaurant business front of house, so I can't cop to knowing the similar things about the kitchen. But I do remember reading that book from beginning to end in, I think, almost one day, it wasn't a short book, but it was like, and I used to make the joke that it was like reading a story about a train crash you survived, because he was, just dead on about the grind and the perils and the characters you meet in a restaurant. And so it was of particular interest. And for example, the likes of his discourse, his place in the culture is there have been paling attempts at traveloguery. The combination of his literary strengths and his bona fides in the restaurant world, they haven't filled in that. There has been no market correction. There's a vacuum, similar to Glenn Hansard in my feelings. But I also, I guess you have to, it's none of my business otherwise. That's the other thing. And I don't know the dude. I found out, if I'm not mistaken, people who knew, there's a story in the book where he talks about a guy named Bigfoot who was like a maniacal bar owner and restaurant owner who would send produce back, and he wouldn't name them, but if you knew, and it was the if you know, you know. He was basically saying this guy was a downtown legend. Everybody knows this guy, but I didn't until I asked somebody I knew who worked at the China Club, which was a kind of famous place. Do you know who the hell he was talking about? And blah. And I was like, oh, no shit, I used to go to that place, blah, blah, blah. So there was never, and like Blue Ribbon, I didn't know it. I used to go to Blue Ribbon all the time. It was a place where Mario Batali used to hang out, but I never remember seeing him because I was always at the bar, running my mouth. But so there's some overlaps, and I'm sure crossed paths and things like that. But I guess it's all clouded by the fact that, his end, and that's the damn shame of being famous, is the time when your family needs the most comforting, the most, the least fine-tooth combing, when they need to people to, going back to the conversation, they need people to be able to do small talk. Like anytime there's been tragedies in my life or my girlfriend's life, those angels in our midst are there are the people who understand I need safe passage here. We can't have a weird conversation. I'm barely hanging on. Unfortunately, famous people aren't given that grace, it seems. So for me to even weigh in on how Bourdain took his life is already proof of the deal not being worth it. You know what I'm saying? And what the hell does my opinion about it have to do with anything? And I didn't know the dude, so like, why would I take it sort of personally? But if you've ever had dark thoughts, if you've ever wondered about your future, if you've ever, like, jokingly, I say, like, I lie about my age. Like, if you're happy with yourself, you don't lie about your age, right? Some have said. But so I understand what it's like to battle dark thoughts. And I don't, it's none of anybody's business how dark they get, and I'm not seeking sympathy, but to hear someone taking their life when it had to have been a dark place, and probably a mistake, they say, right? They say that the guy who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge now helps people not make that final, decision that they inevitably, if you survive, you regret. And now he helps people. If I'm not mistaken, this could be internet nonsense, but like a sea lion helped him reach the surface, and he survived. But alas, no such intervention for Anthony Bourdain, and that is sad on the face of it. And as I'm saying this and feeling gross about weighing in on that part of his life, that's not the public part of his life. But the problem is, right, it's similar to Gene Hackman. He was a controlling person, I suppose, and left the spotlight at a certain time when he could no longer do what he used to do, and he wanted to shun the spotlight. But he couldn't control the narrative of people being too in his mix after he passed away. And so I've used that sort of example as like, if you're controlling, like I am, like we all are, if you're a control freak though, the you can't control like that last passage, and all the efforts to stage manage things winds up being really folly and ludicrous, because you really can't control anything, right? And so I would say that for and I mentioned last week that Glenn Hansard, Prince, Robin Williams, there's a very few people I really bug out about their passing, because it's weird to mourn strangers. Bourdain, obviously, in the restaurant overlap, and that I wrote also and talked about. I always wanted to do like a Kitchen Confidential for the bar, because he barely mentions the bar and the front of house, and the bar. Excuse me. My distinction between the bar and the rest of the restaurant is that it's the revenue center in every bar because of the markup of alcohol. It's usually where the cash out is done back in the day. So there was a higher responsibility. And as mixology became the thing and speed, and it's a skill position, right? So it's the sort of front of house. So when you're in the back losing your shit as a line cook, unless you're in a show kitchen, your lack of composure can sort of, it's not good. And I'm sure a good chef would say, keep your shit together, but you're not going to turn off the crowd because you're not part of it. You're quote unquote back of the house. Whereas a bartender, when the pressure is on and you got to crank out drinks, has to, keep their shit together because it's a front of house position. But I always wanted to sort of make that distinction. And I guess because chefs have to learn the chemistry of food, et cetera, there is a craft and an art form there. That is a bit of an exalted position. And ultimately, yes, the bar is the revenue center, but the reason people are there, other than in a nightclub or a straight up like watering hole, people are there for the food, et cetera, et cetera. But the food is such a tight margin that, the booze is what keeps the door open. And that was always my position about hierarchy in the restaurant, as far as like how management should interact with me, right? But these are hopefully ancient histories and grudges, but it did affect me that like it did many people, that he went out that way, and the audacity of anybody to be angry that wasn't in his life, but I was, and what it did was it tainted my take on his stuff. I like that book. I like that book a lot. Very audacious, very well written. I read the follow-up to that one, Medium Raw, I think it was, or Medium, I forget, where he talks about eating ortolan and things like that. And then to varying degrees, the shows, I guess, and I definitely burnt out on the food stuff in the early 2000s. I just overdosed. I couldn't care less what happens on Top Chef after after I just sort of OD'd on all that stuff. And, even in my restaurant, I would bring articles in about food and beverage to general managers, and they didn't give it. They weren't as avid as I was, which is another thing to learn, that, not everybody's as avid as you are or reads as much as you are. And I guess I really appreciated the literacy level of Bourdain and the things he kind of rambled about. But like what separated him in the travelogue show or the travel shows is he wrote his own copy and wrote it very well. But it's not a discernment or a criticism of him. But as I was watching this documentary and seeing him in the booth reading scripts that he wrote for these things, where he got to weigh in on the beauty of Vietnam and also weigh in on the debt Americans owe to the legacy of violence and why we were there, and the bouillabaisse, if you will, of the complicated relationship and yet how much he loved the food. And I probably have an erroneous desire for Vietnamese food. I haven't had a lot of it, but I always said, it was that combination of French and Asian food that it just seems like it must be heavenly cuisine, but I haven't been a lot, and he would back that up, and I may have even got that notion from that. And he wrote really fine copy for these shows. But I've spoken about, and we've seen it, writing is, to me, refined thought. And if it was the dominant medium, like it had been in many previous centuries, it was your best bet to get thoughts out there. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but the lack of books being central is probably a bad thing in my estimation, because I have books, right? But I know that with other ways of communicating and viable ways and delivery systems and the internet and stand-up spoken word, sound bites, all these things, communicating is really what it is. And so the refinement of writing, but it's also, there is I forget what the word, I don't want to butcher that word, but there is an interruption, a cognitive inhibition. I can't write and type as fast as I think, talk, and feel. And it's I guess, is it 2-dimensional or 1-dimensional? It's a surface in text. And so, it, and even Springsteen was asked if he met all his heroes. And he said, yes, I have. And he said, inevitably, and the cliche, I don't know if it comes from this interchange, I think it's an adage, but don't meet your heroes because they can be disappointing. And because I absorbed a lot of Springsteen myth making and journalism, he said that I write from the best part of myself, right? So you write Land of Hope and Dreams, but if you're shitty tired and you cut someone off on the freeway and throw the finger, you're not that guy who wrote, you're the guy who wrote Land of Hope and Dreams. But that purity of thought, that refinement of your feelings through and then you're adding music, melody, chords, and the ability to sing, play, you are down to a tincture of a pure feeling of positive inspiration, et cetera, et cetera. And to some degree, I think a lot of that great copy Bourdain wrote, and with editing, I think in some ways it was belying, obviously, the dark nature. And again, not in any comparison, I haven't written another book. I have a lot of an old blog that I have now retired, and all those words are no longer on the internet, and I need to repost them, I suppose, just for saying I was here to some degree. But a lot of what maybe was in those is not where I'm at today. And so the copy he wrote is either wish fulfillment or the quote unquote the better nature, the idealism, the curation of an image, the leaning into others' perceptions that have flattered you. Those kind of things are what can come through on the page that are harder to hide. And this is what we're seeing with podcasts, where people who are used to being scripted, curated, get hour to 2 hours to speak. Inevitably, those facades fall, and the full disclosure stuff backfires on some people, or people just aren't up to the task of being erudite about multiple. They're not polymaths or whatever, and he certainly was, and he could expound on many things. But and I guess in that show they said that the quote unquote addictive personality, that was evident in all walks moving forward. So the Brazilian jiu-jitsu he started to take up became an obsession. And I think it just come down to plain, like, it's a substance. And if he was battled the heroin, which is documented, I'm not slagging anybody here, then I would imagine maybe the drinking would be also kind of off the list. But I guess, you know, the quote of picking your poison, it's more social. But did he ever really get out of that? And but then in that documentary, they say that he was not there was no toxicology, nothing in his toxicology, which is sad. And I feel bad. And I don't know. There's envy there too. And then if somebody had the enviable dream job, but wasn't happy or never got, quote unquote, got it sorted, then I guess that would be the narcissistic, what about me, like making his passing somehow affect you. And that's trippy and troubling and evident in a lot of people who didn't know the dude being mad or being like, how dare he? I just don't envy anybody who's got that darkness, you know, because I've straddled that darkness, to be honest with you, and it's not a fine place to be. And I really probably can't cop to having, you know, maybe I've wanted to be deeper than I am. Maybe I'm just a simple fucking guy, you know what I mean? And I just know what I want to do with my time. I wish I could do it more. I have to find a way to finance it, and I'd like for that to not be as backbreaking as it used to be. Maybe I put in this sweat equity that I hope will pay off, and you know, and his dreams, quote unquote, did come true, but a lot of it took him by surprise. And that restaurant stuff will kind of bust you up because it is a pirate ship in many regards. And what's really frustrating is when it becomes corporate and the pirate ship and the permissive nature of the industry then gets repealed and standards of behavior have to change, and for the better, I suppose. But what's lost is the fun. What's lost is strong leadership to handle problems before they have to be documented. You know, the idea of write-ups. When you worked in New York and it was not a corporate restaurant, a write-up, it's like you just get fired, yelled at, or told to fucking chill, you know, or you got to apologize. I mean, we had Christmas parties where busboys got fucking in a fight and someone fell on glass and had to go to the emergency room. Like it was that. And I'm not saying that was good. I'm just saying that ethos is a different, we're in a different world. And I'm blanking on how many years it's been, but can you imagine what he'd be seeing today that would have him sort of up in arms, but also writing from this perspective of champion of cultural diversity at minimum, you know, writing from this sort of rock star, you know, everybody smells their own cooking to some degree. And so knowing all that and knowing how he went out, the reason I wrote about the refined thought and the thinking, not to say he was, it's similar to, not similar, but the Bourdain thing made me understand what I'm going to have to come to terms with in certain regards. I am very self-referential in all the things I do, but there's only so far you can go with that based on the life you live and the parameters of your experience. So eventually having to go to fiction will be something that I think will have to be evident for me, which is why I think I'm back to acting and away from stand-up, is I can no longer reconcile autobiographical stuff with what really lurks in my abilities to act and to perform and things like that. And I had to look at the poster because I had one of those shower thoughts. And what I loved about Hamnet, spoilers on Hamnet, but I think with all that brain power he had, with all that fame and fortune and perspective and skills and talents and people skills and connecting, but he was very shy. But whatever that darkness was, this is where I mean spoilers. In Hamnet, which is just a fictional version of what may have been going on for William Shakespeare and his wife and the loss of a son, she goes to the Old Globe Theater, the scene that broke me down, and I don't know why, which was the beauty of that movie, which is, again, not a rewatchable, but one of those moments, you know. The scene in the Old Globe where she goes, because he named the play after his son, I guess that's the autobiographical part, and they lost the son. She lost the son to the plague. It was harrowing. It's heartbreaking. And then she's basically like, how dare, she sees the flyer, how dare you name a play after our dead son when you weren't here? You were busy writing plays about fucking A Midsummer Night's Dream and shit on the docks in Avon or whatever. How dare you? She goes, the place is packed. People are really into the show. He's the ghost. And I'm trying to piece together, like, what is he saying? If it's a father-son, the father is the son. It's an avenged, you know, and it's set in Denmark, and he's got all this fiction around this idea that this is how he was going to channel his grief into the story, which is a previous held notion of mine that fiction is actually more true. And when you're just referencing and writing copy for a travel show and everything is about the restaurant you used to work, eventually, you know, you're going to blur the lines and you're going to start to fictionalize truth in a way. And I only say that because for all the envy and wishes of my life, if you take a fatal step to ending yours when the world, quote unquote, seems to be your oyster, what hope do we have? But that's not for me to say, and that's me being narcissistic about it having anything to do with me. But what I would say is that the writing and the pose of the writer, the idea of writing to theme but using yourself as sort of your main character. When you see Hamnet, the William Shakespeare character casts himself as the ghost in Hamlet, the dead father. The motivation for the play is this ghost visits Hamlet. Another spoiler for Hamlet. The ghost visits Hamlet and says, like, avenge me. And from what I remember from either English class or Shakespeare class in college, if there's no other person to witness the ghost, then that can or can't be insanity. That's the big debate. Is Hamlet insane, or did he get visited by the ghost? And one of the evidences that he's insane is that there's no one else there to corroborate they saw this ghost too, maybe. I vaguely remember that. But so when you see Hamnet, the movie, why is William Shakespeare playing his dead father's ghost? And the son is the young Dane, and the woman is watching it, and she's pissed because she's like, how dare you basically like write a tell-all book about and try to make money off our tragedy, which is sort of mixed into this bouillabaisse of celebrityism and what an artist uses as their palette of colors, and is everything fair game, and is there any decorum? And so she's watching this, and she's thinking she's seeing her son up there, but it's really like not. It's Prince of Denmark, and she starts to notice that the audience is into it. And then she reaches, and it's beautiful, and she reaches to the child and the whole audience. It's this, I think it's what I'm understanding about it, which I couldn't understand why I was crying, and I could cry now about it, but it was like the unspoken thing of like, this is what life and art is. We don't understand. We just want to be entertained. Maya Angelou said that an easy page of writing, an easy page to read was a hard page to write. And so if the audience is seeing Hamlet and it's about this, that, or the other, but it was really a grief play, a way a father dealt with his grief, and that the mother of the lost child could relate and see that this was turned into something profound, beautiful, and it did honor her son, but it wasn't intrusive. And this beautiful moment happens in live theater, and and her son is alive, in name maybe only, but she almost like forgives her husband for not being there. She's still grief-stricken, but something good came out of it, I think, is what that's getting at. Because grief is an emotion that comes from the inevitable pain of loss, and grief can be a great theme. But if you write a story that is literal, then that's a rough go sometimes, because there's no art, there's no craft. And so being a memoirist or being a travel logist or a nonfiction writer, it can get weird because you want to goose it up with observation. Your observation can be artful. You can say, the first time I smelled a Vidalia onion, I knew that I was going to be a chef, because who knew an onion could be sweet? That's true, but it's also some fictionalizing of the first moment you smelled a Vidalia onion. You know what I'm saying? Whereas this William Shakespeare character's got a ghost. He's setting it in Denmark, and he's writing a play about grief. And we spoke last week about to be or not to be, was whether to stay or whether to go or whether to give up. Again, why this stuff is great is because now I'm talking about Glenn Hansard and I'm talking about Anthony Bourdain, and it all comes back to be or not to be, and maybe that's all that art is. And why Hamnet was so moving, and when the whole crowd is reaching toward the stage and having a moment, it's like they're saying it's to be. The crowd is responding to this play by saying it is to be. It's to be. We're going to be. We're going to stay. So it's the not to be lost when the crowd receives that play. And or not to be is where Bourdain ultimately succumbed, He chose the not to be. And so it does retroactively, I don't want to use the word taint, but it does cloud these messages previous, if that's, the outcome. And I've always said, when people talk about wanting to be, they brag about, there's places in Key West where they still dine out on, this is where Hemingway drank, and people are very, romantic about him, and their bullfighting and deep sea diving and fishing and womanizing, and that's a shell-shocked dude, a PTSD dude who never got his, and Hunter S. Thompson, all these sort of, they had tough endings, and I don't know how mine's gonna go, and I don't want to think about it, and I don't want to go dour, but it all comes back to be or not to be. And I don't know in Hamnet if he's playing the ghost of the father, because even if the father was murdered by a bad uncle, he is taking the guilt of a father who wasn't there or who couldn't protect his son. He's killed himself, Shakespeare, by playing the ghost. He is dead. And he's saying to his wife, who understands the story of their life, he is saying, I deserve this. I am gone. But then he activates the son, brings the son back to life in fiction, and says, avenge me. Your uncle fucking did this to me. Then we're off to the races, and then something positive can come. But make no mistake, he's condemned himself. But his son is still driven to madness, if you will. But I think that's really the full circle of these last 2 weeks of bringing my love of Hamnet and Shakespeare and how this all kind of relates. And so I did do some thinking over the week about that Bourdain documentary, and trying to stay in the positive after all that, and talk about not having a clippable moment. This is gonna be a brutal one to post by Tuesday in terms of finding anything that isn't long form. And again, why I'm thinking of speaking these vlogs, these posts, these verbal diarrhea essays, whatever you want to call them, is I don't know that it keeps me honest, because I can edit on the fly with what I choose to say. But at very least, I can't hide behind fixing my sentences or saying something positive, researching an errant fact. And I'm not saying this is hopefully where, hopefully we still read and we still write and there's still literature. I just don't know that that's my best bet for communicating. And again, it was so edited and so well put together. He was a craftsman, Anthony Bourdain, but it wasn't really off the dome. And I don't know that makes any difference, but, just God bless anybody who struggles like that. And to be or not to be, if you stick with art or you stick with love, then go with the to be and be that audience reaching to the stage, and hopefully put that together with what Hamnet was about, was a grief, somebody's grief channeled, and all kind of great art is maybe has something to do with that, original sin, that's what the whole Bible is about. We had it all and we lost it all. Paradise lost, maybe that's the only story to tell. And those of us who are tasked with still being here after some of these well-known, famous or less than famous or well-known or whatever, when they do serve as lessons, and being obsessed with them might show some emptiness in your life, or knowing that you have it all. And, as long as you find a way to get what you need, there's not a lot of people to envy when you have it so good, if you're blessed, like I like to think I am. And I'm starting to confront that I am blessed, and starting to confront that I have had a fear of success, because success changes things. And I mentioned that. It seems like after 100 of these, they're all the same thing, right? And that's the joke, right? The joke about all of it is it comes down to boy meets girl, boy loses girl. It comes down to it comes down to the Odyssey. It comes down to the Bible. And that's why the more you try to ignore small talk, or that the weather is the first thing to talk about, the more you ignore these tried and trues, the further you get away from making any sense. And so that's where I'll leave it. Oof. I really gutted this one out, and I don't know if anything came of it, but it started rough. It felt rough. I never like to apologize, but we're going to wrap it up. And the song of the week is bonkers, because they don't match the theme, and maybe that would be the theme, is to start with the song, but the song is just a little way to keep the material going. But the song this week is the New Jack Swing classic, maybe Exhibit A, of what you explain to someone what the New Jack Swing was, which was early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, what they would call like hip-hop influenced R&B, the New Jack Swing. And Teddy Riley, from another cat from Virginia Beach, if I'm not mistaken, him and Pharrell, but another cat from the South, Teddy Riley was the producer, and he got his own group. And the song on my all-time list is I Like by Guy, which might be the band of the New Jack Swing. But he was the producer for, a lot of people say Just Got Paid by Johnny Kemp was the original New Jack Swing track. But I've spent a lot of time loving the New Jack Swing. All of that stuff appeals to me. And I think R&B and hip hop being, rhymey and no hooks, I think we need hooks to make these things radio friendly. And so the New Jack Swing, I Like by Guy, Aaron Hall, Teddy Riley. That is the song. I'll put that on the list. We had Glenn Hansard. Last week. I don't know what to put on this week. I think I'll just put this song, although I want to get back to putting last week's song on this week's and then moving forward. But I got a little out of sorts with the tribute to Glenn Hansard being the song of the week. But this week, the all-time playlist is I Like by Guy. It's a really good mid-tempo song. It'll be a song that will be nostalgic for a certain type of folks. I think it crossed over, but I don't know. But you will see the aunties, the aunties and the unks really, oh shit, that's my jam. It's definitely a cookout kind of like throwback, because it is kind of a dated sound, but it's just energy, it's brightness, it's put it on. I'm going to put it in the descriptions, because after this sort of unaliving themes I had in this one, go listen to I Like by Guy, Aaron Hall on the vocals, the New Jack Swing. Let's go. All right. Peace.